Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Leadership Summit. We are so glad that you could join us today on this day of professional learning meant to take family, school, and community partnerships to the next level. My name is Marcy Cam, and I will be the session's moderator. This is session 12, New Ways of Communicating About Dyslexia in Ohio Schools. If you do have any questions, concerns, or technical issues, please message me privately in the chat. To ensure that you get the most out of today, we do ask that all participants turn off their webcams and microphones. If you do have questions for the presenters, use the chat feature, and I'm happy to pass them along at an appropriate time. You can also join our conversation on Twitter, and be sure to use the hashtag Breakthrough22 to share your thoughts. And at this point, it is my pleasure to welcome both Meredith and Shireen. So Meredith serves as our project lead and internal evaluator for Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center, and she has worked since 2014 to support strong family school community partnerships within Ohio's education system. And then we have Shireen Tambaraja, who serves as the Dyslexia Administrator for the Ohio Department of Education, working to support districts and educators in the implementation of the new dyslexia support laws. And it is my pleasure to turn it over to Meredith.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. See if I can advance my slide here. Well, not too far. Okay. Thank you for coming. My name is Meredith Wellman. As our title implies, today we're going to be talking about dyslexia. And the reason we're going to talk about communicating about dyslexia is because there have been some changes happening in Ohio's education system right now. And Ohio really is not alone in adopting some new laws and supports related to dyslexia. And so our two organizations, the Ohio State University's Statewide Family Engagement Center and the Ohio Department of Education, began working together this past spring and really partnering to develop some new communication tools. And we're doing this because we know that it's really important, obviously, in any new initiative, whether it be education or public health or otherwise, to really have clear information out there for people who are responsible for following a new policy or a law. So the other reason why I think this is really important work, and I'm happy to be presenting it today, is that Ohio has over 600 school districts and 4 million households, probably more than that. So we're really here to make sure that no one feels like they're really starting from zero developing communications. We're really lucky right now in Ohio to have federal funding for a statewide family engagement center, and also lucky to have such a great partnership with our state Department of Education. So as I'm sure you've heard today or in other days, our center's mission is to equip and empower schools and families to meaningfully partner with one another. And so I just think that we have this beautiful opportunity to come alongside families and districts, schools and teachers, community partners, to really listen to the questions that are coming up, to develop some templates and really then see where to go next. So please feel free to share your role in education in the chat, whether you're a family representative or a teacher or community partner. So we'd love to know what brought you here today. And with that, we're going to kick off our new ways of communicating about dyslexia in Ohio schools. Thanks, Teresa. We got some parent mentors here. That's great to see. All right, so we've got some specific learning objectives here today. We hope you walk away from this session with a greater understanding of the connection between home to school and school to home communications and building trust. And then also able to apply some general criteria to your communications to understand if they are trust building or maybe in some cases trust eroding. So we'll talk about what that means. We hope you'll walk away aware of recent changes in the Ohio education system to support students with dyslexia. And if you're here from another state, you may be able to take away some things for your own practice as well. We hope that some of this is very generalizable to what other states are doing. And then the last learning objective is that we hope you walk away aware of resources that you can use personally to talk about dyslexia in education in Ohio, or that you can use to write communications between school and home or home and school related to how we're supporting kids who have dyslexia. All right, so I'm going to throw this question out to you, and I hope that you'll share your ideas in the chat. Marcy put it in the chat there. What does it mean to be trustworthy? What does it look like or sound like from your perspective when somebody is trustworthy? While you're thinking about that and sharing in the chat, I'm going to keep talking. So we know that communication can build trust and it can also erode trust. Yeah, Allison says you can depend on someone who's trustworthy. Think about in your daily life, your interactions with other people. All of our communications can have ripple effects on the people around us. Yeah, Julia, showing integrity and honesty, doing what you say you're going to do. That's huge for me. I think about working with my child's early childhood centers and places where my kids go. When people follow through with what I ask of them, I trust them more. Yeah, Christy says consider them to be honest. Absolutely. So I've got a common definition I can pull up here, which is very much in line with what you guys are saying. Hoy and Shannon Moran say that trust is the willingness to be vulnerable to another person based on the confidence that they are benevolent, reliable, competent, honest, and open. And this idea of building trust through better communications has really been a focus of our center for a few years now. And so when we learned about the new dyslexia laws, I at least thought to myself, this is an opportunity for us to get out there and listen and create and share. So if you think about dyslexia, people are going to be hearing about it, learning more about what it is based on some changes that are happening. And families and community partners and school staff will have questions about that. So I think the extent to which we can be proactive in developing ideas for what to say when people ask questions, to have some letter examples available and resources to go with what people tend to frequently ask questions about. That's really going to set us up for success in the long run. All right. Thank you, Marcy, for doing some takeaways from our presentation along the way here today. All right, so this was one of our learning objectives, and I think this is really helpful, at least it is for me, to think about when I'm developing anything from an email to preparing for a phone conversation with someone. We've got some general guidelines you can follow when developing communications. So the first thing to think about is the tone. So tone communicates the feelings or view of the sender. So if I'm sending something, is my tone collaborative? Is it professional and is it engaged? Or does it talk at a parent or caregiver or at a teacher using inaccessible language and jargon? The next kind of key general criteria to think about is the focus of the message on academic success? Or is it maybe more compliance oriented, like we have to do this letter because Ohio Revised Code is telling us we have to? So that's definitely something to consider. The next general criteria is, does it value families' expertise? We know that families are the most knowledgeable people out there about their child, about the history that their child has had, about their strengths, about what tends to help them focus, all those kinds of things. So yes, educators have expertise and that needs to be valued too. I think these things kind of go both ways. And so if we're trying to develop trust, we need to acknowledge these things in our communications. So there's sometimes these subtle ways that we're communicating that only the school is the expert. So that's just something to generally think about as you're developing a message. Another general criteria is the message proactive, solutions-focused, and strategic? Or is it more maybe reactive or deficit-focused? Does it focus on practices without really communicating why we're doing things differently or why it might be more effective to do something new? So that's definitely something I would think about as I'm kind of focusing on maybe sharing about something new that we're doing in the education system, like maybe a new screening. Why are we doing this? Why do we think that this will be a better way than what we did before? And then finally, the mood. Is the mood inclusive, positive, and committed? I think it makes a difference if I'm hearing from a teacher who's working with my child that they have hope for my child, that they are confident that they can work with my child every day in a way that's going to help them to succeed. So I think we can communicate that in our communications, whether it be a letter or a phone call, etc. So will our communications help families feel included, positive, or will it leave them feeling kind of sidelined or anxious or confused? So we hope you see these criteria as ones you can really use across communications. And with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Shireen, and she's going to talk specifically about dyslexia, what it is, the prevalence, and then we'll get into what it might look like to communicate in a trust-building way about it between school and home.
Great. Thank you, Meredith. So just to build off a little bit on what Meredith just discussed regarding building trust and communication, we thought it would be helpful and maybe a nice example to share the legal definition of dyslexia, talk about that a little bit, and then think about how there might be a time and a place specifically for invoking a more legal definition versus one that is more appropriate to the context of family communication and thinking about what Meredith just said, like collaborative tone, remaining professional, but also being very factual. So when you read this definition, which is straight from the language of the law, you'll notice it is very scientifically derived. The way dyslexia is described here is a reflection really of decades of research around what the core identifying behavioral characteristics are of people who have dyslexia. And that's really important. That's a really good foundational starting point for understanding what these laws are and why we have them. But it's a lot of words, and it could be somewhat overwhelming, particularly, for families who this was not even even within the realm of things that they were thinking about. And so what we think is important in terms of communicating and remaining collaborative and thinking about tone is to focus on what the main point of this definition is, which is really just to have a shared understanding of what dyslexia is, what the characteristics are, and what the goals of the laws are, which is to support children and families through a shared definition. So within the context of this discussion about communicating with families, keep this definition in mind. This is definitely where the laws begin, but we'll also be sharing documents that I think demonstrate a way to talk about a definition and to describe dyslexia that has a more accessible and collaborative tone. So one of the most frequent questions that we would get at the department, especially when these laws first came out in 2021, was how common is dyslexia? How many kids are we even talking about? Why is there such big legislation for such a small percentage of students? And so part of the answer, as we try to communicate out to the field, really comes from that definition that I just shared. And it comes from the idea that there are these identifiable characteristics that are associated with dyslexia. And that's what the laws are primarily focused on. And so research that has looked at the proportion of students who have some of these characteristics, who are having some difficulties specific to phonological processing, it is quite large. It's anywhere from 15 to 20%, and the research is pretty much converging on that percentage. And part of that is because the other thing we know about dyslexia is that it exists on a continuum. And so there might be students who demonstrate very mild symptoms, which could really just be addressed in their classroom with core instruction. And then we have a smaller proportion of students who have moderate to more profound difficulties. And so part of the messaging that I really try to put out there as well is that these laws they're not about diagnosis. They're not about moving kids to special education. It's about recognizing that there is a large range of students in Ohio with very different needs, and many of those needs can be met in the classroom. Some cannot. But the point is that we need to identify students as early as possible along this continuum, make sure that their reading needs are being met so that they can get the support that they need to be successful in school. Okay, so we've talked kind of big picture, what dyslexia is, how common is it, all those things, but where do you go to actually get all of the nitty-gritty information about the laws? So luckily, there's lots of options for finding out the details of these new legislative statutes. So the first way is to actually read Ohio Revised Code. Maybe that's not the most fun and exciting and glamorous way to understand or to get information, but it is available out there. I think Marcy just put in the chat the Ohio Law Code website. So this is the legal language. It'll tell you straight up, what is the expectation for these laws. Another excellent source of information is the Dyslexia Guidebook. And I think for schools as well as families, this is probably one of the best ways to understand not only the facts of the law and the timeline and what the expectations are, but also what does it look like in reality, in action. How do you implement these laws on a day-to-day basis? And so that's where the guidebook comes in. There's lots of student vignettes to kind of illustrate what screening looks like, what parent communication looks like, things like that. So it is available from the Ohio Department of Education website. I think you can also probably just Google Ohio Dyslexia Guidebook and it'll pop up. We always encourage people to contact the dyslexia inbox. So that email is there, dyslexia@educationohio.gov. This is great for if you have really specific questions about any policies or any parts of the law. It's really just mostly me answering the inbox, but we do have a literacy team who helps out and supports. So any questions that you have, we try to get back to people within 24 hours as possible. And one of the more exciting resources that is now out there through our partnership Meredith and I have worked on is this new Dyslexia Resource Guide for Ohio families. And in that, I think you'll see a little bit of what I talked about a more accessible definition of dyslexia. So we started from where's the legal definition, and then we kind of worked our way back of, what is an effective way to communicate what that means to families. So that is available on the OSU site, and we're really quite proud of it. We had a lot of stakeholder input, parents, literacy specialists, and so please check that out. And then finally, Ohio, like a lot of other states, has a lot of family advocacy groups, and so we recognize and honor that sometimes the best source of support for a parent who might be dealing with this for the first time is another parent who has just gone through that. And so there are several advocacy groups in Ohio, some from a national scale, like International Dyslexia Association. There's also Parents for Reading Justice advocacy group. I think the link might be in the chat also there. And that group in particular has developed a free online professional development designed specifically for parents. So that is really nicely done. And we just kind of hope that these new laws will spur more conversation among families about dyslexia. Again, shared understanding about what the legal requirements are, and then thinking about the part that we can all play in supporting students and families and educators. I think we're going to have a poll here.
Thanks, Shireen.
Yeah.
So I take away from that there's just a lot of different ways you can plug in and learn about what Ohio's doing, what dyslexia is. And, I'd like to invite anyone that's interested in sort of coming alongside us and helping us identify what other resources are needed, or helping us even write, what's this going to sound like for XYZ people. Let us know if you're interested in participating in this process, because we're going to continue to develop new things. So next we have a poll that Marcy's going to pull up, and just give us a sense for, I think it should be a check all that apply. Which of the resources we just shared about were you familiar with before the session today?
All right, pulled up the poll. Are folks able to see it?
I don't see it yet.
Not yet.
Is anyone else seeing it? Tell us in the chat when you're able to see it. Okay, not yet. Okay, what about now?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Sorry about that.
And is it letting you check multiple things? Hopefully. Yay.
Yes. Okay,
awesome.
Good.
Okay. In a minute, we'll share the results so you can see what everyone's saying. Getting the sense that this group is pretty well informed, but not surprisingly, because we just launched the Dyslexia Resource Guide for Ohio families. That one's on the lower end, and not as many people were aware of the dyslexia advocacy groups in Ohio, compared to some of the other resources like the laws and the guidebook for schools. All right, gonna wait one more minute in case anyone else wants to chime in. Okay.
Wow. Informed group. That's good.
Yeah, so it looks like 78 to 80% of people are aware of more of the resources for schools, I would say, and for people who need to follow like a new policy or law. And then maybe slightly fewer people have been to the ODE website, which is definitely a great sort of up-to-date resource that I would recommend. If this is something that really impacts your work or your family, that is a great sort of up-to-date resource for you. And then I'm glad that this session is an opportunity for you to get those links to the other resources.
Yeah. I think the Ohio Dyslexia Committee will be very glad to know that the guidebook has such wide reach here.
Definitely.
Okay, so sounds like most people are already pretty familiar with dyslexia support laws, and so you probably already know that there are several parts to it, and it's actually 4 separate statutes with different actions required on the part of districts and teachers. And even though there are these like four separate statutes and distinct laws, they do work together to build I think a systems level support structure for our students, and that's really important. So for example, there is a teacher professional development requirement, and the goal of that is to provide teachers with foundational knowledge about understanding the characteristics of dyslexia and instructional practices for all students, but particularly those who are struggling. Then there is the screening requirement. This one probably makes people a little bit more anxious because it's coming up soon. But the goal of this, again, based on that definition, is to identify those students who are going to need additional supports wherever they are on that continuum. And so that screening requirement will start for kindergartners, starts next year, with some options for students in older grades as well. And then part of the law also is just about, classroom instruction, like I said, for teacher professional development, and providing teachers with resources and strategies for supporting students in the classroom. And then I guess the real part of interest here for this particular discussion is that there are some very clear requirements around communicating with families. And what I think is most important about that is it's not just informing families like, here's your child's reading progress, here's the scores on their screener, but it is about sharing that shared understanding of what dyslexia is, including a definition, including descriptions of evidence-based strategies in the schools. And so to me, this is probably the most powerful part of this law, because there is such an emphasis on not only telling parents where their kids are, but really trying to partner with them in terms of sharing information in a way that is collaborative, but in a way that will build out that larger system of support. So, a real focus on the role that families play, and honoring that as well. So, as I said earlier, we know the screening part of the dyslexia support laws is one of the biggest. It's a heavy lift for schools and districts. We understand that. But I want to talk a little bit more about what that means and what that looks like. So the goal, as I said earlier, is early identification of students who are going to need some type of reading support. And so this is carried out in a two-step process. So first, there is a universal screener, and that is the mandatory screening that every student will get. There are actually no exceptions in this law. And as I said, that will start in 2023 for kindergartnens, and then some older grade bands as well. So it starts with that tier 1. Sometimes we call it a temperature check because it's just a real fast, standardized, quick read on whether or not a student might be experiencing some difficulties, but it doesn't tell us why. It doesn't tell us what the cause might be. So it's just a, very, very brief piece of information. And so students who are identified as potentially being at risk from that screener, their parents and guardians will be notified. So there's lots of parent communication within this screening process. So that's one point. And then students who are considered to be at risk are then monitored, and then if needed are given a second assessment, which is called the tier 2. And that's really more of an in-depth assessment to better understand why that student is at risk, what the skills are that they might need support, so that the school can then communicate that to families of, this is where we're seeing where your child is going to need a little bit of extra help, and this is the plan going forward. So that the screening process is actually kind of a nice lockstep in terms of being able to build out communication to families. So all of this will happen at your child's school for the parents who are on. And again, the actual mandatory part of this starts next school year, 2023.
Does anyone have any questions about the screening that Shireen was just talking about, or any of the particulars of the law that you've been wanting to ask her about? We have a few minutes here, when we can just sort of pause in our formal presentation and just answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, I threw a lot out there, so.
We can also answer more later in the presentation. I know this is all very new. Yes, Lisa just said the approved screeners for this school year were just shared out. So if you're a school or district person and you've been waiting for those, they are available. And I know Shireen's been fielding lots of questions in the dyslexia inbox about those. So yeah, if you haven't seen those yet, definitely go check out the approved screeners, because we know schools are very interested in that. Teresa wants to know how long it takes to administer the tier 1 screening, for example.
Yeah, that's a great question, Teresa. The parameters that the dyslexia committee wanted to put around that is about around 10 minutes. And so I don't know that the review criteria necessarily had a time frame, but the idea, again, like that temperature check, is that it's very brief, approximately 10 minutes per student. at the most. So of course, every student is different, but that's kind of what the goal was for that tier 1 screener. And I see Krista has another question about, will they continue to approve screeners, or is this the final list? So the review process is annual. And so this is for the 22-23 school year. The Office of Assessment will run this process again. I actually think that they will want to do it relatively soon. So the list will continue to change as more vendors apply to be on the list and go through the cycle. It's subject to change for sure. So I wouldn't call anything final. It's just, this is for this year.
And Shireen, you told me, and maybe, I hope I get this right, but it will continue to be the approved list until a new list comes out. So even if a new list doesn't come out until, say, September of next year, this list will continue to be valid until any new list comes out. That's good to know.
Exactly. Yep, exactly right. Okay, so do schools have a window by which the tier 2 follow up? So there's a little bit of flexibility in the law with the tier 2. So students who are identified as being at risk on the tier 1 can either be progress monitored for up to 6 weeks. And then if that student isn't really making progress as expected, then the tier 2, excuse me, would take place, or schools can do the tier 2 right away. I think depending on where you're coming from, if you see that a student is at risk, why wait 6 weeks and try to figure it out? Might as well just get right to it. So there's options in the law for when that tier 2 would happen, but there's no like, full range that's marked out in the law. It's not as designated as some of the other timeframes. Hopefully that answers your question, Barb. And then Christy says we're using Dibble's 8th. So those questions, excellent questions. And for questions about how to use the screener and which aspects of it, we would probably refer you to the vendor to provide that information, because they'll know exactly what they submitted for approval. And so the vendor themselves would be the ones to answer that. So I'm not trying to like shirk responsibility, but I want to make sure that you get exactly what you need. And the vendor would be the person to answer that.
Shireen, I have a question here from someone about, would the screener identify things related to math, like writing numbers backwards versus letters? Would the screeners kind of capture that, or is it primarily letters focused screening? Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the intent of this tier 1 screener is really to focus on the skills that are associated with characteristics of dyslexia. And so it's largely focused on phonological processing. And again, it's meant to be brief, so there's only so much, I guess, that they can pack into a 10-minute screener. But the tier 2 screener, so a tier 1 screener has to be selected from the approved list that the department puts out. A tier 2 screener does not. And so districts and schools have some flexibility in terms of choosing a tier 2 screener. And that would be probably that's an excellent idea of things to think about and to look at in a tier 2 screener. But currently what was selected as tier 1 screeners, I don't believe has anything on more math related content.
Do you happen to know if some districts have kind of their own screening process to look at kids in math, or are there certain screeners that do focus on math? Just
there probably are. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any. But I actually just know from my previous job that was an area where we felt like a lot of more work and research was needed in terms of math.
Okay.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
Which professional in the school building will be the one testing? So, this is going to be a very ODE answer, but it's largely a local decision. In the law, it just outlines that there should be a multidisciplinary team of people who are involved with the assessment process and reviewing data and building instructional strategies and building instruction and intervention for students who need it. So it's not really, there's no one specific person or one specific role. Recognizing that all schools are very different. Very small schools are going to have a different person who is the best suited for that kind of role. We do definitely encourage, however, that teachers, the classroom teacher, would be involved because that is the person who knows the students the best and would probably be able to be, part of that process and in a way that makes the child feel comfortable as well. Okay, so I think maybe we'll move on, but you can certainly keep questions coming because these are all really good ones, and I'm fully aware that there's lots on people's minds about dyslexia screening. So I just lost my screen here. Okay, so as we can see with any new laws, it definitely takes some time to know, what this means for your school and a particular child or family. So part of the work that Meredith and I have been doing together and what our teams have been doing together is to try to make that easier by creating some additional resources. So this is an example of one. This is actually a flow chart for schools about when communication happens in that screening process. So there are minimum requirements for when communication should happen from school to home. And so, we felt like this visual was kind of a nice way to demonstrate that and make sure that Ohio schools feel confident with how to communicate with families in these new ways and what the timeline is like. So I think Marcy put the links in there to this flow chart, which we hope is helpful and outlines the minimum requirements of when communication should happen. So after that tier 1, if a student is at risk, actually before the tier 2, also if a student is going to be administered a tier 2, and then after the tier 2, regardless of outcome. And for someone who asked about timelines of tier 2 screener, there is a timeline specific to when results of the tier 2 should be shared, and that's within 30 days. So those are the minimum requirements, but of course, their schools may already be engaged in additional communication about children's reading scores.
We did have one question. So at the dyslexia course kickoff on Tuesday, Carolyn Turner, who is the presenter, shared that for some grade levels, a tier 1 screener could be used diagnostically. Can you speak to the statement? She didn't elaborate. So Shireen, would that be something they would need to follow up with a vendor to determine if any of the screeners are diagnostic tools?
Possibly, and I don't.
I didn't think that was their purpose, but.
Yeah, no, it's not the purpose of the tier 1. So I'm wondering, I wish I'd been there to hear what Carolyn had said. But so for that question, I would actually suggest that you send it to the dyslexia inbox, because then I can share it with Carolyn and maybe she'll be able to elaborate a little bit more on what she meant by that. Sure. That's okay.
Yep, so you should have actually 2 resources that will probably be very new to people in this room because we just really finalized them and got them up on our website. One is this flow chart, which, everyone kind of like processes information in their own way. So we actually have, it's a 2-pager. On one page, it's a flow chart, and then on the other side of the page, it's a table. And so whichever way you want to learn the information and, share it with others, you've got an option there. And I know both were really helpful to me in their own different ways. So I kind of like both of them. And then the sample school year timeline is also helpful because it kind of shares not just for dyslexia, but I think it also has other reading diagnostics on there, like what time during the school year did those happen. So it's been fascinating for me to learn about all this with LM Clinton and with Shireen from ODE. Such a wealth of information.
Yeah, it's been an excellent partnership. We're very happy about it.
Yeah. Okay, well, keep putting questions in the chat. We're going to move to the next slide.
Yeah, so this, I think probably for us, this is the most exciting resource that, and I think probably will be the most well-used resource that we've been working on. And so these are sample letters that districts can use to communicate with families. So these are very much aligned to that flow chart that you just saw, and the minimum requirements of when communication should happen. And so eventually, once we are still working on these, but when they are done, the flow chart will link to each of these particular templates that can be used for districts to communicate with families. And so something we want to emphasize, first and foremost, is that these are templates. They're not required for anyone to use. Totally understand and honor that districts will have their own way of communicating with their families, and that is definitely the way to go. But we wanted to be able to at least provide a resource or a starting point, an outline for the ways that districts might want to communicate some of these particular points of information. So I think we were going to try to go to one, link to one, if we could.
Yeah, let me
still able
pull
to do
up.
that.
Okay, let me know if you can see this or not. Can you see a new letter on the screen, or do I need to reshare?
No, you got it.
I got it? Okay, cool.
Yeah, so again, this was a team effort, certainly led by Meredith and her team, but we had literacy specialists and lots of other stakeholders at the table to provide some insight. It's a Word document, so very easy to adapt in any way that you would need. Some fill in the blank options there, if you wanted to straight up use this template and just fill in, or if you want to change it up in any way. It's kind of a more than what you might need, but at least a lot of information is there that we hope would be really useful.
Yeah, I definitely want to emphasize that, I think we'll get better at this over time. We'll have more or new updated drafts of these resources. So definitely keep coming back to our website to see what's new, because we know that next school year is really when we're going to see the biggest changes happening in the system. So we'd love to have your local examples. I know we've got people from districts in the room here that have been great partners with us in the past, sharing their local examples. So we'd love to continue receiving those and really reflecting on what that means at the state level, or what examples we can share out. And there was also some additional feedback that we're still kind of working on figuring out how to incorporate it into this sample. So stay tuned, basically, is the moral of that story, and we'll continue to do our best to share out more examples and get better at this.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry. Let me go back to that. I feel like we didn't quite get to the end. So I guess just kind of walking through this a little bit more. The sample letter really specifically shares the why behind, why behind the letter. I think it's important as we get more comfortable. I think we should be comfortable using the term dyslexia in schools. It's not like a bad word. It's just a word. It carries meaning for people. But I think awareness is power. So we do have a couple links on our Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center website that you can refer people to if you want sort of a not necessarily a district specific website, although you could certainly develop your own. So we've got the go.osu.edu/dyslexia link. And then our brand new Go link is directly to the resource guide for families. So if you add the word guide to the end of that link, so it would be go.osu.edu/dyslexia guide. That will go to the guide that that we developed with the Ohio Department of Education specifically for families. I think, this letter template in a lot of ways invites partnership and invites ideas from families, which we know is really important. Just that idea of setting that expectation that families can be involved. Sometimes we might be surprised at then what people do with that information. It's not that we, would expect necessarily that every family would do the same things at home with their child, or that they would copy what a teacher does in the school at home with their child, but just inviting that partnership is important. And then also at the end, we have some sample language for basically inviting a continued conversation. So, what is the best way for families to reach a specific individual in the school who can work through ideas with them or conversations about their specific child? And then I think, the optional attachments are really where you can get creative and really student specific. So what are some things that families could easily do at home, maybe a part of their daily lives? What are some things that they could try in the car ride home, or during mealtime, or during sort of playtime with their kids? We know family life is different for everyone, but there are these kind of common times that we tend to have with our children at home. So how do we maximize those? But keeping in mind that families are busy and they do have other priorities. So we just had some suggestions for, some attachments to get feedback from families, and also to give them some ideas for where they can go for additional information. Thank you to those who are offering to help in direct messages to me. I will save the chat and definitely reach out to you when we're going to have our next meeting. Or if you'd be interested, I could also share sort of an early draft with you via email, and you can just send me back your track changes or other ideas via email. That could be another way you could engage with our team.
Nice.
All right. I think we're going to continue, but yep, we can always answer more questions about the template if you have them. So I'm going to just kind of quickly reiterate our general guidelines you can follow in developing communications. I guess I would hope that, we're providing templates and ideas for schools to use, but also hoping that on the back end, so after letters are sent to families or conversations are had with families, that that you as educators will talk to families about what they're taking away from your communications. And then you can work to adjust them as needed. So for example, in our sample letter, we compare a tier 1 screener to kind of like a gauge on a dashboard of a car. That might not be the best comparison for your local school community. Maybe, a lot of people take the bus or they walk, and, so referencing a car and what's on a car may not be the most culturally responsive example to share, and that's fine. I think the idea of sharing a comparison is good, and so I would definitely encourage people to think about what examples would resonate with your community. So Shireen mentioned, a screener can be kind of like taking a temperature at the doctor's office. It's not going to tell you or the doctor necessarily exactly how your child is doing or what's wrong with them, but it's a general gauge of health, and then you can dig deeper after that if needed. All right, so what's the big takeaway is it's also important to know, was your message received, and how do you know? All right, so always in family engagement and education, we want to think about two-way communication. So how are we equipping families with good tools for communication? I think it's a good way to build trust, to share examples of kind of giving people the words to say what they may not know how to say. We're not born understanding how to make specific requests about our children's education. So we did come up with a sample request that families can make for a Tier 1 screening. So we hope that you'll consider sharing this request in all the various ways that you communicate with families, or for targeted, if there are instances where you feel like groups of families would benefit from having this information. So we hope that sort of with proactive communication about the new screenings coming out, and with transparency about what dyslexia is and how our schools are supporting quality instruction, that we won't have all families kind of rushing to request screenings, but let's just kind of trust that we can work through any hiccups along the way, yeah, just kind of trust in that process. I hope that we can do that at the state level and also at the more like the school and community level. So hopefully these resources are ones that you find to be helpful, and again, really would be cool to see how you're adapting them, see what seems to be working well for you all. All right, so we've been talking a while. We'd love to know how you plan to use these resources. So we've got about 4 minutes. I think Marcy pulled up the chat, or the poll. You can also feel free to unmute if you want to share how you're thinking about using the resources as people are responding to that poll question. If anyone wants to chat about what they think. So for some of you, are you thinking that this overall presentation would be helpful to share out, or are there specific documents that you're gonna like immediately put into practice? That would be good to know about. All right, we'll share the poll results in just a minute, but it looks like lots of you are planning to share with colleagues or friends, which is amazing. That sort of informal or more formal sharing is going to be really important over the next couple of years as things, become more the norm of practice in schools. Looks like a little under half are going to download and use the templates. That's good. Glad those are going to be useful. I very much appreciate the option that says, I'm just going to mull. I'm going to mull on what this means to me, and then I'll decide. So looks like about 7 of you are saying that. All right, can you all see those results? Cool. All right, so for the 9 of you that are going to create your own staff or family presentation on this topic, please let us know if there's any way we can help with that. I think the slides are shared as a PDF probably, but if there's any specific slides that you'd want to use or have access to, just feel free to email me. I'm going to put my email in the chat box. It's wellman.87. And then we can talk about, the best way to get you that information. All right, thanks, Missy. Missy's going to share these supports with her colleagues as they support districts with the dyslexia law implementation efforts. Christina wants the whole presentation. I think we can help with that. All right. Well, I hope that throughout this whole presentation, you've gotten some new ideas, really to ensure that when we're building trust through our communications, we're doing so with all families in mind, not just necessarily the ones that, we are most confident communicating with, or, the ones that have the most time on their hands, or, students who are performing the best or having the most difficulty. So, I think that we can continue to obviously improve upon these templates, but I'm just grateful that you're here today, and that we can see this as more of a starting point, and that as we continue to refine, we can continue to grow as a state in how we support students with dyslexia and their families and the community partners. I'm personally motivated to do this work because of the outpouring of support from my friends, my family, my colleagues who all seem to really have a story to tell about dyslexia. And you may have experienced something similar when the idea of dyslexia comes up in conversation. A lot of people have been touched by this and have been touched by the education in various ways, some good, some bad. So please continue to share your ideas and your stories. Please reach out if you see that a resource is needed and it isn't currently available. Because as a center, we are committed to making sure every child and family has opportunity, no matter who they are or where they live. And this is a great time for me to mention that the Dyslexia Resource Guide for Ohio families that we shared today is in the process of being translated into a few different languages. I think there will be 5 different language versions available. And maybe as soon as next week, but I don't want to necessarily promise next week. I just know that they're actively being translated right now and will be on the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center website very soon. Okay, I think we've got a few minutes here. What questions do you have? What feedback do you have for us? Anything else for Shireen about screenings or timelines? Feel free to turn on your camera or unmute or just share in the chat. Thanks, Teresa, for being here. Thanks, Barb. Thanks, Missy, for all your chat interaction today. Much appreciated.
Yeah, good crowd.
Thanks, Jen, for being here. Good to see you.